Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Daniel Grant, a Toronto writer and producer who co-hosts the Spoiled Rotten and Uncolonized podcasts, both of which are well worth your time, under the TDF Everything banner. And he's about to go into production on his first feature, which is very cool. Daniel picked Life, the 1999 prison comedy starring Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence as a couple of 1930s New Yorkers who make the mistake of being in Mississippi while black, are immediately framed for murder, and wind up sentenced to life on a work farm where they spend the next 65 years. Written by Robert Ramsey and Matthew Stone and directed by rising star Ted Demme, it was sold at the time on the goofy possibilities of Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence being cranky with each other in old age makeup, which is, well, not exactly what one might have expected from a film about two black men wrongfully convicted of murder in the Deep South in the 1930s. We talk about that. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I think this is a movie that for whatever reason, it feels like this is when I started forming my own taste in movies, and more importantly than movies, storytelling. When this came out, I would have been like 13. So it was kind of like, I did see it with my parents, but it was kind of like, it was the first time I recognized that I had my own opinions on it. Other than that was good, that was bad.
Right.
And I think there was something about the humor, but the way it's interweaving with all these very sad things happening, I think that just really spoke to me. I was like, I think I like that. This feels better. It didn't feel cartoonish to me, like that. I mostly Martin on TV. Martin Lawrence, I was like, yeah, he's kind of the cartoonishly fun guy. And then Eddie Murphy, I'd seen most of his movies at that point, and I was just like, this feels like they're taking it a bit more seriously. And maybe that it was because it was so specifically about being caught up in the legal system, and they did have obvious tones of the racial inequality and stuff like that. And I just felt like, yeah, like I like this feels good to me. And it was, yeah, just an early example of me having a strong opinion on the way the story was told and not just whether or not I laughed.
Yeah, it's a weird one now, like 22 years later. I watched it again last night. I found it on Netflix in the UK, where it's packaged as a wacky comedy. And I guess, but it's really strange to watch and to be aware, like painfully aware, that it's written by white guys. It's directed by a white man, Ted Demme, who was not a bad filmmaker by any means. But I just kept thinking, like, 1999, what would Robert Townsend have done with something like this? And, you know, it's so clearly insistent on comedy, like on finding the funny and finding the joys. And then if you've seen the trailer recently, it's bizarre.
The trailer that was another thing. I remember it was one of the first times I was cognizant of like, hey, how come that wasn't in the movie the way the trailer was, the way
right,
it was in the trailer. Like, I think there's like Cicely Tyson's in the trailer, or like other kind of, maybe not the trailer, but she's in like promotional stuff for this movie, and she's just not in it. And even the way they get sent to jail is different. And so, yeah, like the trailer is trying to be more fun and happy.
Yeah.
Movie.
I think Stir Crazy was a big influence at the time, right? Because that would have been 20 years before that. And I think we're as far away from Life now as Life was from Stir Crazy, which is just bizarre because I saw that when I was a child. And Stir Crazy is like an overt comedy where the characters are innocent. They're sent in undercover. Like, basically it's this whole sting thing. And then the one person who knows about it dies and they have to get out. And the stakes are different simply because, I mean, it's Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor comedy, but also because they're not black men in Mississippi in the 1930s. Like, that context is so different and so casual in the movie, because there is this charming level of unreality that they're going for, where like, I don't think we're encouraged to think about literally anything other than the relationship between these two mismatched characters.
That is the big thing, is that like their friendship and like how that can get them through this is more important than any kind of like fighting for equal rights, or like anything, you know, like there's obviously when they try to get a pie at one point, but it isn't, they're not really going for that kind of reality.
Yeah.
It is. I think that would be too sad. It would be harder to get the laughs that way.
Like it would, right? And the other thing too is that this is 5 years after the Shawshank Redemption, which I guess is in everybody else's heads. Where like at the time, certainly it's, I hesitate to call it Black Shawshank, but that's clearly what they were going for. Where like the authority figures are just unrelentingly cruel and they don't care, and everybody.
Because in this one, it's half the people say they're not guilty. Don't you think that's funny? And he's like, well, excuse me if I don't laugh.
Yeah,
but which I do think
the closest it comes to actually dealing with the fact that it is possible that a lot of the people in that prison are innocent because the system did not care.
And I mean, this movie does show like all the people talking at the table, like in their first cohort, those people acknowledge, oh, I did terrible things. Yeah. And part of me was like, I think this is the only time I considered like, are they saying it to sound more tough? Because obviously it shows the Claude and Ray are lying about what they did to get there. I'm like, is everyone lying at this point? Or is it like, was it just to highlight like, oh, they're out of their league here. Everyone here is actually a killer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if everyone is, then it's weird that the movie keeps empathizing with them, right? Like it's very, very strange that the arcs that they give the various characters. And I don't I watched it in 99 and thought, this is interesting. Like that was my entire take. I walked away going, yeah, well, okay. I like the performances. They obviously like Eddie Murphy loves makeup. So Nutty Professor hits, he decides he wants to put it in this direction, but the makeup sort of held to the end and it's not the real focus. And clearly like based on the trailer that you're describing and the one that I saw and all the stories about the reworking of the material, I think is how they put it. They didn't say we reshot a bunch, but the original DVD release was like full of stuff that didn't make it and discussions of why. And there's like there's a little placard on the trailer that Netflix is running that says songs by R. Kelly. Even though,
I was going to bring that up. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Speaking
because you mostly hear Wyclef, but it is. I do remember because I only knew about this movie through a music video I saw through the Casey and JoJo song, which is at the end, the Life song, and I just remember being like, oh, I want to see this movie. This looks cool, and then knowing that it was like an R. Kelly project, that whole soundtrack. And I was just like, oh, I guess there's that we're going to have to deal with when I rewatch it. But luckily you don't hear his voice too much, so I can forget about it and just think about the Wyclef Jean of it all. Yeah,
he was preemptively disappeared. That's kind of amazing, really. But it was not, I suspect it was not the thing it started out as. And I don't know if that's because Brian Grazer isn't interested in that sort of stuff, unless it's a Ron Howard film and it can be really, really important. Like this came out the same year as The Hurricane, which is a film I have massive problems with, but is at least about the thing that it's about. Definitely. And Life is this, like, it's not a bad movie and its choices are really interesting in a lot of ways, but I was so conscious that it can't tell the story of these men the way it should tell it or even acknowledge.
Right. Because they're leaning into the comedy of it. It would be even worse if they did try to like really nail down how upsetting this is, like what the real reality is. They have to keep, doing that magic trick of like, here, laugh over here and it'll all be fun.
Yeah. I mean, these guys have whole lives. They're introduced as characters. It's not just types the way like Wilder and Pryor were in that movie, where you've seen these guys in a movie you liked. We're going to just basically ask them to do the same thing. This is, I mean, there's some echoes of Harlem Nights, I guess, in Murphy's performance, but
yes.
But he and Lawrence are the sort of oil and water combination of the wild man and the straight man and the comic relief and the frantic, fussy comic relief. And they have jobs and dreams and relationships and all of those things.
I really leaned into that. Like his dream for the Boom Boom Room, like that always stuck with me. Like Eddie Murphy, like needing to create his own Cotton Club and stuff.
Yeah. Which is like, it's a great character point for Ray, who has a vision and just lacks the ability to put it all together. And I kind of like, it's weird. Like the one thing that's missing from the movie is a scene where he builds one in Mississippi, like, or just, in the barracks or something. Because the fantasy sequence is great and weird and sad.
Yes. This was the first time I thought of it as sad. I was like, wow, this is the happiest they'll ever be as a group. Like,
Yeah.
they're never gonna get this close to this, that close to this.
Yeah. And the whole concept of the movie means we're like, none of this is going to pan out. None of the escape plans is going to work. None of the dreams is going to, like, is there going to there's that little derailment in the midsection where Bokeem Woodbine shows up as a phenom pitcher who, you know, again, a lot of use of the R word there, and a lot of lot of weird conditional treatment of a mentally challenged character. But the idea that they might get out as his managers, I mean, we know that's never going to happen. The movie's telling us it's never going to happen, but it actually works that way. That section, I think, is still kind of the most moving, because I don't think
and they do a good job of like making sure that like that is what breaks Martin Lawrence, like Claude. Like, it's like he just can't accept that, like the way Ray is able to be like, all right, like, yeah, obviously that's how that's going to work out for us. Claude, that breaks Claude. He's just like, nope, no, like he said he was going to do it. I'm done. Like, I can't believe this didn't work out. And then that's kind of where they start parting their ways, and it becomes sad for a little bit.
Yeah, and it's a weird sad, right? Like, there's that montage where people disappear, and we have to sort of accept the fact that we're never going to see these characters again, which I'm positive was part of the reshooting, because they've got it. Like, they're a 28-year jump at that point in the film just seems really strange. Because it's 1932, then 1945, then maybe 1970. And then
they jumped to the 70s. And I do think that this watch through, I was like, oh, like it really is a much shorter period of time that they're old. Like, in that, as you said, like the Rick Baker makeup, like it's like, that's just like kind of the last 10 minutes. Whereas I thought it was evenly split up, like in my head.
That was my memory of it as well. And I wonder if that isn't just because of the commercials. I mean, they really played up. They wanted that was the only Oscar nomination the film got. They were clearly trying to get Baker recognized again. And I know that Eddie Murphy is like, he's enamored of makeup, especially at that point in his career when he was in his late 30s and his early 40s, where he really just wanted to disappear. I think his face and his delivery became so identifiable with a certain type of comedy that he wanted to do literally anything else. Because he wanted to be a movie star when he started, but he was always like a comic character actor. Yes. And this film uses that performance, like that history against him, because he can, like, for a while, Eddie, like certainly in the mid 80s, Eddie Murphy was Bugs Bunny. He could get out of anything, and now he can't. And there's something really powerful about him disappearing himself the way he does in this film, like just receding into the makeup and letting that take over, to the point where, you know, even his speech patterns change because he's concentrating on it. It's an interesting performance from a guy who wasn't always giving them at that point in time because he wasn't being asked to.
That is, I think, while I didn't like the movie less, I think one thing that really stuck out to me was like, I really like this Eddie Murphy performance. And like, it kind of made me be like, oh, I wish I talked about his performance in this way more, because I do feel that like it is his delivery, but even this time I was so happy that he did switch up how he was delivering lines when he became older and they were living with like Ned Beatty and stuff. Like, I was like, yeah, like, good job. Like, I'm glad that you switched it up, but you still feel like it's Ray. It's just, he's older Ray. He's learned a lot more now.
Yeah. He's broken by events, but not by his like friendships, by the people the people he trusts. Well, does he trust anybody really? Claude is the one who does most of the trusting, but Ray keeps clinging to Claude in that weird way that he's enlisting him in stuff, even though he doesn't necessarily like him. Just the idea that they got into this together, and like Ray feels genuinely betrayed when Claude is chasing his own appeal without including him. That's a weird beat story-wise, but it makes perfect sense the way he plays it. Yeah. You know, like the buddies
like, oh, like what happened to we, Claude? Like, did we get some bad news in that letter?
Yeah. And the buddies who can't stand each other. I mean, it's your classic trope of comedy, but what is it? It's the scene with the bottles where he just says, I missed you. And it lands. Like, it really lands.
I really like the bottle scene. Like, just even because I think that was, I mean, even before Ray is up on the bottles, it's like, yeah, he's not going to say what needs to be said to get away. He's always going to be himself. So when the guy, it's not Pike, it's the guy whoever Nick Cassavetes.
The bull,
like whoever. He's like, hey, shoot him if he falls. He's like, oh, you don't want to give me that because I'll probably just shoot you. And I'm like, I mean, that's Ray. Like he's constantly talked himself into trouble the whole movie. Like it's not going to change now just because he had this like decade-long fight with Claude.
Yeah, there's this line that John Landis used to describe a scene in American Werewolf. He's like, the opening scene that everybody says is so much fun, of David Naughton and Griffin Dunne just walking through the moors, just screwing around. He says he's never understood why people laugh at that because they're going to die. Like everything, those two characters are dead from the first frame of the film, is how he put it. Mm-hmm. I find that fascinating when a filmmaker doesn't quite get the way the scene is being received by the audience, because we're responding to the charisma, to the life that they're showing. And it's the same with this movie, I think, like where it's not sad because the performances are too buoyant. Even when they're breaking down in misery, there's still something comic to it. And the music keeps trying to be sad. Like the music keeps trying to, that's the narration for us. Yeah. That's how we're supposed to know how to feel. But it's also somehow capable of accepting the weird mixed race baby I am Spartacus joke that pops up halfway through, which
that was my first introduction. I mean, I think I understood they were doing Spartacus. I think I knew, but I hadn't seen Spartacus at that point.
Well, neither had they. It's like, 1945.
Right. So I think I was just like, oh, that's cool. And then I feel like they start laughing and I was like, is that like a Usual Suspects thing, like the way they're in the lineup and start laughing together? Like there's all sorts of like references. Like I certainly had Shawshank Redemption in my mind, especially because it's like the escapes that they pull off. And like I remember basically up until this viewing, me like, oh, what a good like way to get on them. And this time I was like, I guess it's not that smart or clever. I just really like, I was really swept up in it because you'd seen them fail so many times. I was like, I'm just happy they got out, I guess.
Yeah, one of them is bound to make it, and then it just keeps not happening. It's such an odd artifact of storytelling too, like from 1999, to see how it handles, I don't even know how to describe it. The sort of the prison gay stuff is how I would describe it then. Where
it is odd because I feel like the one out and out joke is when Bernie Mac introduces himself and he's like, oh, so like, you'll have no problem adjusting or anything like it. And Martin doesn't understand what he's saying. But then I feel like they take at least the relationship between Django Leg and Cookie seriously enough.
Yeah.
Like his death scene. It's not played for laughs.
Yeah, it's not about gay panic, right? Like it's about honoring those characters in a really weird sideways kind of way. Like they have to get the laugh out first just to make everybody in the theater relax. But, this is at a point in time where queer relationships, especially in Black comedy, just aren't happening. And it's weirdly progressive. And that struck me this time. It's like, oh, this was handled a lot better than I remembered.
Yeah, I was worried going into, I'm like, all right, how many, because I think it is that scene, like that it is played for laughs, but the death scene I really appreciated. Like, I mean, I was hoping he wouldn't die, but I also understand the mentality of that character. I felt like that was another like play to Shawshank Redemption when the first guy gets out and hangs himself, and I was just like, like what he sets it up. He's like, what am I gonna do when I get out? Like, I can't live like that. Yeah,
that line just rings in a strange way. I can't go home like this. And what does that mean exactly? Like, who was he before? Who did he think he was? That's like it's the closest it comes, I think, to arguing that prison destroys people. This movie doesn't want to acknowledge that because, again, if we did, then we have to think about just how sad it is that these guys had futures taken away from them. But then we get a little petty revenge, which once again has a white savior thing to it, kind of, sort of, that doesn't pan out.
Well, this is I saw it as, I'm glad that like the net, you're talking about the net beating character. I can't remember his name in the movie.
Well, yeah, the warden or the governor, I was just going to say, just killing Arlie Ermey, killing Pike in revenge.
Oh, right. Yeah. So I guess that is them getting some kind of revenge. But I was happy that, I keep saying things that are weird. I'm not happy he died. I'm happy that he wasn't able to like follow through and get them out. Like it was their own doing that got them out of that situation. Like as much as it was nice that white person protected them when everyone would have just been like, yeah, they killed him. And he believed them. It was all for naught because they still had to go back to the infirmary and be in prison because he died on the toilet. Like, it's not, he didn't actually get to like fulfill the white savior thing. It was getting there, and then it stopped it.
Yeah, it's like the one joke that's missing. And given Ted Demme's other films, I'm convinced they shot it, that there is footage somewhere of like either Murphy or Lawrence, or maybe even both of them, just opening the door, finding him dead, and just kind of going, and going back downstairs or something, just for the joke of it. Because that's just too, it's too funny not to do it. But at that point in the film, you also couldn't do that to people, I don't think.
Right. I think it would be, it's good that they kind of break, and then like, it's more of that like Princess Bride thing of like the narrator talking to the people whose sons, so that you don't have to like have the visual of like, oh, and he died, and then what was the process of getting them back to the jail and everything. You can just hear it and be like, okay, fine, whatever, they're back.
Surprisingly, like, it's not an epic length. It's like 105 minutes before credits, and it's just zipping along at that point. Well, we got another 2 decades to go, so let's just roll through that. And then you get more cranky old man makeup stuff. But again, there's acting going on under there. Like, it's not just the joke, which I think was how everybody dismissed it at the time. I mean, you've got the DVD cover as your backdrop, and that is definitely a comedy spin on the movie that you're about to see, with Lawrence and Murphy looking indignant, and everyone surrounding them being larger and more threatening. That's not the movie, though. Like, that's not ultimately what it becomes.
And I guess I should say I do like Martin's performance, only because at that time I'd only seen him on his TV show, and I thought like, it's still, you still see how that person could play this role, but it was a lot more toned down. It wasn't as stool fucky as like some other stuff he's done. He was like measured. Like, I was like, good for him. Like, he's not trying to get the laughs by being the idiot in a scene. All the laughs are because of how persnickety he is and everything. Like, I liked that element of his performance. Yeah,
it's a good fit too, putting him against Murphy, who's just always going to be the bigger personality just because of the associations we bring with him. And I found out, this surprised me actually, but according to the IMDb at least, the white pie scene was originally reversed. It was Lawrence, like Claude is the one who gets more upset, and Ray just wants to leave because he gets the tone of the room immediately. And instead they gave it to Murphy, and he just basically complained louder, and that worked. And it makes sense too, because he's like he's the rooster. He's the one who just comes in and just starts yelling at everybody until they do what he wants, even though that never works for him even once, which is sort of great.
I did like, I really do like that pie scene, because one, I like that they acknowledge, like, he's like, oh, that sign that says no colors. Yeah. How did we miss that? But like, because it is kind of like, he's like, yeah, whatever, we're from New York, we can figure this out. And they're like, no, that's not, get out of here. And I also like his watch, like the thing with his
the runner with his father's watch.
I really appreciated that they like stuck with that. Just because I do find that like in these situations, it's best for me if I know there's something that one of the characters actually cares about. Like, he can do all the scheming he wants, but like, it'll all blow up if something bad happens to his father's watch. Like, that's what's going to always anchor him and like let me know that he is taking stuff seriously.
Yeah. And it actually works for their relationship too, because like for Ray and Claude, because I'd forgotten the first time I saw it. I have this weird thing about props in the back of my mind half the time, where you know the basic unreality of movies, but if you get invested enough in something, then it becomes a visual callback, and it takes on a certain. I know I told this on the Back to the Future episode of the podcast. It's the dumbest thing that's ever gone through my brain watching a movie, but there was a point where, when I was watching Back to the Future for the 12th or 13th time, because I went every Tuesday for the entire summer to see it and like take it apart and figure out how it worked, there was one moment where, when Doc produces the note that Marty wrote to him in 1955, all taped together, and it just went through the back of my head for a split second. It's like, well, how did they get that to age up like that? How would you do that? And then my inner voice just said, well, they obviously left it in 1955 when they shot there, and then they picked it up now. And my brain started yelling at me, and that was bad. But easily the dumbest thing I've ever thought. But the watch in this one, I remember thinking, oh, it looks good. Like it's still it's clearly the same prop that they shot for the 1932 sequences in the 1970s. But that actually bolsters Ray's insistence that it's real, instead of Claude's dismissal of it, like this is some fake shit. Mm-hmm. And Ray says, no, this is real. This is my father's watch. And when you see it working and shiny, it's just like, oh yeah, okay, Ray was always telling the truth about that.
Yes. Yeah. I like that. That's the one truth, is that he cares about this. Everything else is up for like discussion, but he cares about that watch because it's probably the only real thing he got from his dad.
Yeah. Yeah. It struck me watching it again. It's like that could have been something you add in the rewrites to give it weight, but it feels like it was there the whole time. It feels like the most natural point. I mean, like Claude has a quasi-married relationship in this film that is just vanished. It's just eliminated, but the watch is real. Yes. more than that relationship. And Ray never gets any sense of, if he has a family, he never mentions it beyond that. If he has people, it just doesn't come up.
Liked that they're like, hey, sorry about your mom. He's like, well, that happened 5 years ago, but thank you anyway. And I think Cicely Tyson was supposed to be his mom.
That would make sense.
I get the sense that that's what she was playing, but yeah, with this movie, maybe that would have been a bit too much gravitas because I think she would have been there the day that everyone came to visit them, and at the jail, and maybe that just you wouldn't be able to zip along if you had someone of that stature in the movie.
Yeah. Well, like she just wouldn't play it for comedy.
No.
Would she? I mean, it's probably on the DVD. I should look it up. But I can't imagine that you would ask Cicely Tyson to be silly in that role at that point in her career.
So yeah, maybe that's unfortunately how come she's not in it. But I would have liked to have seen it, because you're right. Like he only talks about his dad, but other than that, there's no human connection he has other than at that point Claude. Yeah.
I mean, that's so much of the Eddie Murphy thing, right? Like I'm trying to think of any film that gave him an existing romantic relationship in the 80s. Like The Golden Child, the guy just exists. I don't think he has a home life or 48 Hours. He's been in prison. All of his relationships are gone.
And well, I guess he's got the friend in Beverly Hills.
Friends, but no romantic. No romantic connections, because he just doesn't do that in the 80s, which is weird. Like and even in, what am I thinking? Oh, Harlem Nights, where there is a romance, but he kills her.
That's Jasmine Guy, right?
Yeah. That early scene where it's suggested, and then she's trying to get him, so he gets her first. It's just like a really weird relationship that he has to women as not co-stars exactly, because he could share the screen with people, but he just didn't want to be.
He didn't do the love thing.
Yeah.
And speaking of Harlem Nights, I think this was also a movie the first time I was aware of like meta jokes, when he's in the fight and he goes, I know a bitch named Della who hits harder than you. I'm like, oh, like he's actually referencing Della Reese from Harlem Nights. Like it was just like, oh, I thought it was just like a throwaway thing. And then like the more I rewatch, I'm like, oh, I see what he's doing.
Yeah.
That's funny, I guess.
Yeah. And given how Dead on Arrival Harlem Nights was, like I saw that with a preview audience, and you could feel the room just lose their hope. Like it's like, oh, this isn't going to be good, and it just gets sadder and sadder. This felt really weird when it was announced that it was going to start in roughly the same era, but then it turns out, of course, it's a fake out. It's not really where the movie is going. But that's almost kind of brave of him 10 years later to go back to that territory.
I agree, because I've only seen it the one time, and I was just like, why isn't this what I wanted it to be?
Yeah, exactly. No,
it seems like it should be great. Like it should be a lot of fun, and I was just like, you're making me work for everything in this movie.
Yeah. And again, I get it. He just wanted to work with Richard Pryor and make a gangster movie, and someone let him. Like, that's the problem.
Yeah,
he did it on his own, and he's just not a screenwriter. No. I think, for a start, or as it turns out, a director. But the Murphy that made Life is the same guy who's making Bowfinger the same year. Like, he's come through it. He's comfortable doing character comedy. And it really did feel like, I mean, I know there was one other one he made right around that same time, which I hated. Holy Man, maybe?
Yeah, I did not like Holy Man.
Yeah.
If it is that one, I did not like that.
I think it was right around that same time. There was a string of movies he
strong
made for
reaction
Disney.
to that.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. But it felt like as well, like that was a big leading man role that just didn't land. And so he started taking character parts more aggressively. And this is like Nutty Professor and this and Bowfinger. And it saved him, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I definitely think so. But then obviously the problem with Nutty Professor is then he learns like, oh, I don't have to be on set with anybody. Like we can all block it out and I can do my own thing.
Yeah.
And then there's the beginning of that issue. But I think, yeah, Bowfinger in Life is like a good insight into him being able to be more than just Eddie Murphy in a movie. He can be different characters.
Yeah. And credibly, like it's not just a stunt the way Nutty Professor was. Like it's just, he enjoys the caricature, but if you leave the camera on him, he will give you something. Like he will actually produce. And I think he makes Lawrence better. And like people like Bernie Mac, who I guess around that time he didn't even have a show yet, right? Like he was just starting.
That would have just been Def Jam comedy. Sorry, not poetry. That would have been so. It would have been like Martin and Bernie know each other from like Def Jam, and then but I think those were the two big comedians, and then everyone else, like obviously Anthony Anderson's in there, Miguel Nunez, who actually went on to do a couple of movies like Juana Man. I was like, oh, it's interesting that he was, because he's like he does drag in this for the fantasy sequence, but then he also does Juana Man, and I was just like, oh, it's nice that he's able to do that and mix it up.
Yeah, it was the pipeline, right? Like you got a small role in one of these, and then you got a few TV show episodes, a few guest spots here and there, and all of a sudden you're in a feature film because, we think content is king now, but 20 years ago, the studios remember the Touchstone mid-range movie, like The Sixth Man and all that stuff, where they just kept cranking out features after features to release in the spring for some reason. But there's that disposable comedy pipeline. They're just this assembly line, really. And I'm always kind of amazed that Bernie Mac had the career he had, because he was an incendiary presence. And somehow these movies keep trying to make him lovable. Like this and the Ocean's movies too. Like he's right. He's like the friendly one. Like he has his moment in like the first one, but yeah, overall he's like the friendly guy. Like he's the friend that you can count on. Yeah, in the Ocean movies, and in this one, yeah, you like him. You're not afraid of him. He's not intimidating. Yeah, he had a little more to do, and I met him on the Head of State junket. That was basically nice. Yeah, it was that was kind of an amazing day. It was a last minute offer. Do you want to go to New York and do the Head of State junket? A friend of mine just needed someone to shoot video because she had something else in Los Angeles, I think, that week. Okay. And so I got to go. Yeah, Dylan Baker, that's who it was. Yeah. Lynn Whitfield. I'm not sure I met her. Robin Givens, I think. I don't know.
Robin
Keith David.
Givens and then Tamala Jones. Yeah.
I did 4 or 5
Tracy
interviews. Morgan. I didn't get to talk to Tracy Morgan. I met him in an elevator years later, which was weird.
That's what I want to hear, that it was weird when you met him. Yeah.
Well, it was one of those things where there are some people, when you're in an elevator, they look at their phone so they don't have to have a conversation, which is fine. And Tracy Morgan just kind of looked at me and smiled, and I nodded, and he just kept looking at me and smiling. And it was just this great moment of him holding it, waiting to see what I was going to do. And it was just like, this is the best possible experience. This is the best version of that encounter that I could have. And then the doors open. I was like, nice meeting you. And he's like, okay.
Nice. There we go.
Yeah. But talking to Bernie Mac about Head of State, which, not a great movie, but a good showcase for what he can do. That was interesting, because he was talking about how he and Rock would just come up with better stuff than made it into the movie. And he was sort of doing it to Needle Rock, who was the, writer and director. But it was this really interesting experience where I could tell that he just didn't think the movie got him right. And we were talking around that. And I think the show was already on television, because we were talking about the difference between looking down the barrel of the camera and to tell jokes or to perform for an audience without being like obvious about it. And it was like, it's a 5-minute TV interview. There's no time to talk about anything, but I think it was just great to talk to him about how he figures stuff out in the room. And
that would be great.
Yeah. And he was like, he was a big guy. He was like, he took up a lot of space, and watching, I'm staring at this image of him in your background with that weird smile, because Django Leg had a weird smile, and that was the one character bit he has for the whole movie. He's just, whenever you see him, he's like 3/4 rooted in whatever's going on, and then something else behind his eyes. It's just like, he's just a fascinating presence, and I wish he'd gotten to do more. I mean, I wish he'd lived long enough to do more.
I'm glad he got a show, because I remember like watching his comedy. That was a big thing he wanted. He wanted to do a sitcom, so I'm glad he got that. But yeah, it does feel like we were shortchanged on the full Bernie Mac experience.
Yeah. Oh, there could have been more. There should be more. Oh, we have all the other stuff, and we have life, which again, like, it shouldn't work at all, but given, especially now, like, I'm just, through the lens of the present day, where I wish I'd seen a Robert Townsend version of this, or like, even now I kind of expect someone is going to make a straight remake of it that isn't a comedy, and just blow everybody's heads off by finally saying, oh yeah, well, I thought about this Eddie Murphy movie that I watched when I was a kid, and I realized there was a way to do it and actually be sad and embrace the tragedy of it. But it works. Like, it's watchable, it's bouncy. Ted Demme, who also didn't get to live long enough to do everything he could have done, isn't a bad choice for it, I think. Like, he knows how to manage an ensemble, and he knows how to get actors to just do stuff in the corners. It's unfortunate that
I like the big table scene where it comes down to, no, you can't have my cornbread, but like the way he cuts so that you can kind of get people's interjections of like, well, it wasn't he's like, people say that, and it cuts to Bernie Mac. A lot of people say it though. Like, I thought that was really fun, the way he was able to do that and capture everyone's jokes and not feel overwhelming or like it was too much going on.
Yeah, you really get a sense of who the supporting cast is, like the characters and the actors.
Yes.
And that's something he did in, like, again, we're not supposed to talk about Kevin Spacey anymore as a positive, but The Ref is a really solid movie. And it's exactly the same sort of dynamic where every character gets to be fully realized, and we know why everybody is pissed off at everybody else pretty quickly into that film.
Yeah. To be honest, like when I first saw it, I don't know that it was something that I'd ever think about, like who directed this, if it wasn't, like, for my purposes, because I loved Batman so much, if it wasn't Tim Burton or if it wasn't Steven Spielberg, I was like, yeah, someone made it. And then, like, because I liked the story, or at least the way the story was told so much, it did make me lean into, okay, who wrote it, who directed it. It was the beginning of that kind of traction for me.
Yeah. So did you only see it the one time theatrically, or was it something that you revisited?
I saw it in theaters, and then I got it on VHS as soon as I could. I have it on DVD. I don't think it's available on Blu-ray, but I still have the DVD.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I was looking for it the other day, and it's surprisingly hard to find.
Because it used to be on Canadian Netflix.
Yeah,
it's not there anymore.
There's this rotating set of Universal properties. Okay. The Imagine Entertainment ones are currently off, but the Amblin ones are on. So that's like, it'll be back. It won't be long. Yeah. But yeah, no, that's weird. There does not appear to be a Blu-ray, at least in Canada. There are 4 different editions of Life with Jake Gyllenhaal and Ryan Reynolds.
There we go.
And we talked about this before we started recording, but I was like, you said Life, and I'm pretty sure we figured out which one it was going to be. And then I completely forgot to double check. And was like, if we end up talking about the other one, I could probably fake it. But I don't.
I'm glad we didn't have to, because I haven't seen it. And I do resent that it's called Life, because I'm like, there should only be the one movie called Life, and it should be this one.
That's reasonable. I mean, it is set in a space station, so technically it's also a prison, but it's a very different film.
All right, fine. So they do kind of line up.
Yeah, a little bit.
But yeah, I think that's good news for my wife that there's no Blu-ray, because it means I won't be buying another physical copy of something.
Wait, no, there's an American edition.
There we go.
I won't tell anybody.
Yeah, hopefully she doesn't hear this part of the interview, and then it'll just be in the house one day.
Yeah, I find the spouses always tune out around 25 minutes in. I don't know why. My own wife does it with me, and it's fine. I accept it. So as a writer and producer, I guess the obvious question is, like, is there anything you've taken from Life? Is there anything you've tried to lift or replicate or used as inspiration?
I don't think it was conscious, but I do think it is when I'm writing. Like I I self-published a book, and I remember telling her it's a comedy, and everyone's just kind of like, yeah, there's funny parts. It seems really sad though. And I think I just really ran with the whole like having funny parts lighten up really sad subject matter.
Okay.
And in the feature film that we are still trying to work around the pandemic to get done, but I don't know if we're going to be able to do it during this pandemic, but I do think I consciously was like, it's already a sad subject matter, and I wanted to try and make sure that like no one felt too much of that weight throughout the whole movie. So I do think that, yeah, the way that this movie is able to kind of lift your spirits with some well-timed jokes is something that I put into my work a lot. Is I might not be writing out and out comedies, but I'll have a lot of funny moments so that you're not too sad throughout the whole story.
It's a good operating philosophy, ultimately.
Yeah. I mean, this time I tried, but I feel like I've never consciously done it until recently. Like, I think it just always was like, no, this is just funny. Oh, I see how this could be seen as sad.
It's good. No, so what is the subject matter, unless you don't want to talk about it?
Oh, I can talk about it. I'm working with the director. We are kind of like a production duo. And it's about his time as a deathmatch wrestler, something I'd never heard of until I met him, where you actually do use like staplers and barbed wire and hit each other. And he has a kid, and the movie is really based around like what wins out in that, like your love for your kid or your love for this sport. And I tried as hard as I could to not make it feel like the wrestler. I think I did a good job of that. But yeah, that's kind of the movie is this it's more of a family drama. The focus is more on the family stuff than it is on the wrestling, but the wrestling is in there as well.
Okay, I can see why you'd want to lighten that up a little bit.
Yes, yeah. I didn't want it to have it be as sad as the director kind of envisioned it.
So there's a push and pull.
Yeah, I think we work well together. He's very visceral, which is kind of why I think that comes from the deathmatch stuff in particular. And I like to be a bit more nuanced with my stuff. So I feel like we get something that feels like the best of both worlds in our output.
My thanks to Daniel Grant, who you can hear co-hosting the Spoiled Rotten and Uncolonized podcasts on the TDF Everything Network. And thanks also to Jeremy Lalonde for booking us both on that High Noon episode of Black Hole Films last year. You'd probably enjoy listening to that too. You can find Daniel on Twitter at The Young Guard, TheYungGuard, all one word, and you can find Life on Blu-ray and DVD from Universal Studios Home Entertainment. It's also streaming on Netflix in Canada and available on most VOD platforms in North America. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I host the Now What podcast every Friday, and I write far too many words about movies and television. This week, I made fun of the Golden Globes. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're there. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your booster when you can. I'll see you next time.